Okay, so again, welcome everybody to our panel highlighting women in raptor conservation. This presentation is going to run for about an hour, and then we'll save the last 5 to 10 minutes. Oh, actually, ask questions throughout the presentation. We would love to answer as we go. So just put them in the chat in the bottom corner of your screen. I just wanted to thank our support from ZAP for those of you that are local to Salt Lake County, but the reason why we can offer these programs for free is because of ZAP and from additional support from donors like you. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to HWI's conservation biologist, Dr. Jordan Herman.
Great, thanks, Sammy. Hi, everyone, and happy Women's History Month, and welcome to Hawkwatch International's Women in Raptor Conservation event. We are really excited that so many of you are able to join us this afternoon. We're probably going to still have a few attendees trickle in over the course of the next hour or so I'll keep an eye on that. Like Sammy said, my name is Jordan Herman. I'm a conservation biologist at Hawkwatch, and I will be the host for today's discussion. And Sammy Riccio has put a lot of work into making this happen. She's going to be here to help us moderate as well. So we are here today to honor our past, present, and future female leaders in raptor conservation by celebrating their legacy and working towards building a better future for all women in conservation. And as a lot of you know, careers in this field, and especially in raptor biology, have been male-dominated throughout history. And as recently as 2018, nearly 80% of conservation scientists were men. So for the next hour, we will be talking with and learning from 3 women who have almost 100 years of experience in raptor research and education combined. So allow me to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Karen Steenhoff. Hi, Karen. Karen is a research wildlife biologist who retired in 2008 after a 31-year-long career studying raptors for the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Geological Survey. Karen received her BS in wildlife biology from Colorado State University and an MS in wildlife ecology from the University of Missouri, where she studied the ecology of wintering bald eagles in South Dakota. So this was an auspicious start for Karen, as later she would become the leader of the Pacific Bald Eagle Recovery Team. So maybe one of the most impressive things is that for more than 40 years, Karen studied cliff nesting raptors in what is now the Morley-Nelson Snake River Birds of Prey National Conservation Area, which is home to the highest concentration of nesting raptors in the US and maybe even in the world. And in fact, Karen's 4 decades of research played a key role in establishing the protection of the Snake River Birds of Prey National Conservation Area. And in addition to her research, Karen has also made significant contributions to raptor conservation through teaching and advising graduate students at Boise State, as an associate editor for quite a few wildlife journals, and also through her many leadership positions in well-known ornithological societies. So thank you, Karen, so much for being here.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Jamie Dawson, who has been working for Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania since 2018. And as the Director of Education, Jamie oversees all of Hawk Mountain's education programming, which happens on local and global scales. Through her Master of Arts in Biology Global Field program at Miami University, Jamie has a wealth of experience in training in environmental stewardship, education, and community-based conservation. Jamie's academic accomplishments are supported by her impressive resume of experience, leading and developing nonprofit education programs, conducting wildlife research, and volunteering with communities all over the world. And I kid you not, Jamie is incredible. She's done everything from caring for abandoned girls at an orphanage in Ecuador to monitoring gorillas and chimpanzees in Cameroon, to even building her own animal sanctuary with her family, where she's hosted therapy programs for at-risk youth. So now Jamie is helping Hawk Mountain grow their international presence by expanding their global reach and also cultivating partnerships with a diverse network of other conservation organizations and researchers. So welcome, Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited.
Great. Our final panelist is Dr. Julie Heath, who is a professor in the Department of Biological Sciences and the Raptor Research Center at Boise State University. Dr. Heath's career has come full circle since she received her MS in raptor biology at Boise State. And later she did go on to get her PhD in wildlife ecology and conservation from the University of Florida in Gainesville. And a fun fact about Dr. Heath is that after finishing her PhD, she did work for Hawkwatch International as a biologist in Florida, so she's still one of us. Dr. Heath's research lab focuses on understanding how raptors, and especially golden eagles and American kestrels, respond to environmental changes, like climate change, human disturbance, and other landscape changes. So like Karen, Dr. Heath and her students and other members of her research lab have spent a lot of time working in the Snake River Birds of Prey National Conservation Area. Dr. Heath is a prolific publisher of scientific papers and has an excellent record of academic service, which most recently includes joining the board of directors for the Raptor Research Foundation. And I did count on your resume, Dr. Heath. She has helped shape the careers of over 60 undergraduate and graduate biology students.
Wow.
So we are so glad to have you here this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, okay, so now that everyone has met all of our three panelists, I think I'd like to kick off the discussion just by getting to know each of you a little bit more personally. And maybe we could start with Karen. We would really love to know what inspired you to make a career out of raptor conservation, and if whether there was a certain person or place or thing or moment that was especially impactful for you. We can start with you, Karen.
Okay, I really kind of stumbled into raptor work. I came up through wildlife biology, so as an undergraduate, I really didn't think I would be specializing in raptors, but that's where my master's project went. But it might be because my mother took me to the Brookfield Zoo in a stroller. I don't know how often, but I think she probably got my interest in wildlife and especially birds inspired at an early age, probably.
That's really wonderful. I had some of the same experiences growing up. My dad would always take me out to show me animals and get me excited about them. What about you, Jamie?
Um, hmm. I would say I was always super fascinated and in awe whenever I saw a bird of prey in the wild. And I know you can't tell virtually, but I'm 6 feet tall. So I was always playing basketball. And I always remember being on the basketball bus in high school and college going to games. And my team would make fun of me because as we were on the bus, I'd be like, there's a bird of prey. There's a bird of prey I'd see on the road. Yeah, and just having the opportunity, through wildlife rehab and then starting to work with live raptors as education ambassadors was just so rewarding. And they're so charismatic, and it's a great representative from the animal kingdom to inspire people to not only conserve raptors, but the entire ecosystem.
So I noticed that you had also worked in the past with great apes and whale sharks and sea turtles. And so what is it about raptors now that gets you excited?
um, so many things. They're so amazing. I would say um, hmm, that they are, because they're like a bioindicator species as an apex predator, knowing that there's so many worthy conservation projects to study in the field, but we're so limited by our resources, whether they be finances or time. But so if you can pinpoint, be like, okay, well, I am going to study or really focus my efforts on bioindicator species, that if you have that healthy population of raptors, that's a good sign that the whole ecosystem is healthy. And on the flip side, hey, something's going on. The peregrine falcons are disappearing, the juvenile bald eagles. So just by focusing on that type of predator, you can really see like, hey, there's really something going on in the whole ecosystem. There's something wrong that affects a variety of species, not just the raptors.
That's great. Thank you. And how about you, Julie?
I got started working with Raptors when I was an undergraduate at UC Davis at the Raptor Research or Raptor Rehabilitation Center they have there on campus. I started as a freshman because I thought I wanted to go to vet school, and I started working with Raptors and became really inspired by their beauty and their ecology and what I could learn about them. I have to agree with Jamie. I think that their ability, they capture people's imaginations and hearts, and their ability to kind of act as an ambassador for conservation, I think is wonderful. And I think is one of the reasons I continue to work with them. And then, as a scientist, I think they're just a great system for studying environmental change and how animals are responding because they are an apex predator. Then, of course, I've been really a lot of what I think has shaped my career is luck, of course. I mean, that's a huge component of people's lives. And I was lucky enough to come to Boise State at a time where Karen had built a beautiful system on the American kestrel system here. And I was lucky enough to kind of inherit that and some incredible data that informed our research from then on. It's been fascinating.
Did you build off of Karen's work with golden eagles, or did
Oh,
you
yes,
kind of
yeah,
start
right.
yeah?
I guess both, yes. So first it was the kestrels, and then over time, Mike Hooker and Karen had been working with eagles for some time, and I had a graduate student come in to work on a question that had been brought up by Karen about recreation. And since that time, we've been working together to continue the golden eagle monitoring in the birds of prey area.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. I was really enjoying looking through all of your research and seeing a lot of overlaps between what you and Karen have studied.
Oh, yeah,
So I
it's great.
figured there would be links there. Yeah. So I think one thing that a lot of people who are interested in conservation or interested in raptors and raptor biology want to know is what is a day in the life of a biologist or an educator like? I know sometimes we have really grand days where you're out, banding nestlings on cliff sides, and other days you're sitting in front of a computer. And so I guess I would really love to hear from each of you in a little bit of kind of fun and interesting detail what some of those days are like. And I think it would probably be helpful if we just kind of went in the same order. And then also feel free to chit chat back and forth with each other as well if it makes it a little bit easier. So we can start with Karen, if you wouldn't mind describing what a day in the life of a raptor biologist is like.
Sure. Well, a day in the life of my career, probably more office days than field days. When I joined the Birds of Prey Research Project, there were lots of people, mostly guys, who wanted to climb into nests and do the field work, but not many of them wanted to sit down and analyze the data and write it up. So I kind of filled that niche. But I did go in the field, so I can remember lots of windy days, lots of sunny days. But I think I probably spent more time in the office analyzing data and writing up the results.
I know it's kind of funny for being a field biologist. I feel like I am sitting at the computer a lot, sitting down a lot, but it is what it takes.
Right. And then as as your program grows, you become more of an administrator than a person doing the legwork. So that means more time in the office too, which I think Julie can probably relate to too.
Yeah, so what was really nice about this grouping of panelists is that we also have women representing different career paths. Karen, who has worked for federal agencies like the BLM and USGS, and Jamie working for a nonprofit and in education, and of course, Dr. Heath in academia. And so, as we're talking about a day as a raptor biologist or educator, I guess I'd be curious to hear also what it's like working for an agency, for example, or for a nonprofit. Because I think we have a lot of people in the chat who are early career wildlife biologists who may be considering careers either in nonprofit or academia or government. So um, I'll go back to Karen quickly and just ask if you could comment a little bit on what it's like to work for an agency.
Oh, well, sometimes it's frustrating, but the pay is decent and the benefits are great. So, but Yeah, there are frustrating hurdles dealing with bureaucrats. Um, and I think in retirement, the hardest thing is with all the turnover of people who the managers change all the time. And we didn't do a very good job of making clear our results so that the new managers can understand them. And that's been really frustrating. And I'm still plugged into hammering away at the BLM about what the Raptors need and don't need. And so that's something about agencies, is that you're constantly educating the new managers, whether you're still working or retired, I guess.
Yes, well, thank you for continuing to do that, even in retirement. Jamie, would you like to describe what it's like to be a Raptor educator?
Sure, sure. Well, I would say, and I'm also working for a nonprofit, and I even before Hawk Mountain, I feel every job I've had has been for a nonprofit, I think. So number one, you're wearing many hats. And I can tell you I'm a director and I'm still scrubbing poop and, and emptying trash and cleaning the floor because no one's too proud to do that. Everyone is, we're part of a team. And as a nonprofit, there's just no other way to be successful than to wear many hats and just kind of pitch in and do what needs to be done. Um, there is so much variety in the field of Raptor education at Hawk Mountain, at least. And I view that as a major positive of my job. And I think the seasons kind of fluctuate too as to what you're doing. And of course, I think Karen had mentioned too, as you get promoted and, as, you know, when you move up in administration, there is, of course, a bit more desk time that goes with that, and staff management and things like that. But it's definitely a combination. It's a combination of developing lesson plans, of animal husbandry. As you know, at Hawk Mountain, we work with, one of the favorite parts of my job is that we get to work with avian ambassadors, and some awesome reptiles and then some amphibians now that I think of it. So anyway, but that is part of it. You have the husbandry, you have the training, and it's a lot of relationship building with people, a lot of almost like secretarial type work too, just like talking with parents, talking with families or people coming and, answering their questions and designing programs for their needs and things like that. And a lot of partnerships. That's another thing I really love. Like just doing this is so exciting for me. Getting to, as Jordan, as you were reading everyone's bios, I was like, wow, what an amazing group of ladies. I'm so privileged I get to chat with you all tonight. So really a combination of so many things, everything I mentioned, and of course doing the live programs, which is also very fun. I think there's something about getting that energy from a live audience, but also virtual is great too. But that's really fun when you do a program. And yeah, it could be guided hikes or science programs or something really specific to raptors.
Great, thanks, Jamie. It does sound like so much fun. I've been able to meet a few of our avian ambassadors here, but haven't worked with them a ton, but it is so exciting to get to see them in person. So we will go over to Julie. We can hear from you, Julie, about what it's like a day in your life.
Yeah, every day is pretty different. It's some combination of teaching and meetings and writing and mentoring students and probably 1,000 other things that I'm not thinking about. But it's pretty diverse. But I do spend a lot of time in the office. I love it when I can get in the field. But honestly, if everything's going well, probably the field crew and the students are doing that, and I'm back writing proposals to try to get some more funding for them or trying to get some papers out for the next thing. And so, and that's really changed probably over the course, so at Boise State, it's a pretty research high institution for me, not for all faculty, but for our department it is. I was at a university before this, it was teaching high, where we taught a lot of classes, and that takes a tremendous amount of time, but it's also very rewarding, of course, not Raptor specific. Academia, I think we're probably pretty familiar with some of the pros and cons just from people looking into. There's kind of it's wonderful in that there's lots of flexibility, but it also feels like you can always be working and kind of creating those boundaries in your life for yes, this is work time and yes, this is family time is definitely a muscle that everybody needs to build up as they're planning to stay in some sort of academic context, and also probably getting used to rejection is a huge part of the job too.
So it sounds like you've also experienced sort of the higher you get in the ranks, the less and less field work you do. How do you feel about that? Have you kind of enjoyed being able to focus more on analysis and grant proposals, or do you miss going into the field?
I really like data analysis for sure. I definitely miss going into the field, but in some ways, when I do go in the field and I go out with my students or my crew and I kind of see that I'm not needed, in some ways I think I've shifted a little bit into like, instead of thinking about the birds and the data, it's really shifted into like the people. And that's what I think my job is a lot more about right now is the people that I'm working with, either mentoring or my collaborators and things like that. And so, and then sort of, and the not, I also really appreciate going outside, just not associated with my work, right? Like I have sort of my personal time outside. And I think actually that's probably a commonality among all of us, is that there's that part that can be fulfilled too. It doesn't always have to be as part of your job.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, one thing I love about working in conservation is that I get to go outside and do what I love for my work, but at the same time, when when you're kind of taking time off, you might be going to go birding. And so that kind of blurs the line between work and fun time. But in the end, I think it's really wonderful to have a job where you get to do what you love and get paid for it. Um, well, thank you so much for telling us a little bit more about what it's like to be each of you. I think it would be great to get into some more of the nitty-gritty questions about what it's like to be a woman in conservation. So, one question that we have for our panelists is, have you faced any challenges in the world of conservation and biology and education, specifically as a woman? And if you wouldn't mind sharing those with us and reflecting on those a little bit. And we can start with Karen.
Sure. Like I said, I started in wildlife rather than zoology, and I think that tended to be more of a male-dominated field than zoology all along. And I can remember going to a student chapter of the Wildlife Society meeting when I was an undergraduate, and the executive director of the Wildlife Society said, what are you women doing here? Are you wives? And we said, and Amy Galperin stood up and said, no, we're wildlife students. And he said, well, I might as well tell you right now, I don't think there's any place for women in the field of wildlife biology. So that just made us more determined to, and back then there were like 3 of us in a class of about 60 students. I think it's about 50-50 at Colorado State now where I graduated, so that was good. And then in the BLM too, that was pretty male dominated. And as I was pushing and pushing for more access to computer resources, the guy in charge of that said, "Why don't you just get married and have kids and get out of here?" So those were kind of the types of challenges I saw. But I think in general, I think the Raptor community has always been more open to women than the wildlife community. That's my impression. And conservation biology, I was surprised to hear your statistics. That's kind of concerning still.
Oh, I was really surprised to read that as well. And for the attendees here who didn't hear at the beginning, in the introduction, I shared that 80%, as of 2018, 80% of conservation scientists are men, which I feel like hasn't been quite my experience yet, but it's a really surprising and saddening statistic, but I hope that more and more women will go into conservation. Curious, Karen, why do you think the raptor world has been a little bit more open to gender equity than other wildlife worlds? And I don't know if you have an answer for that, but I would be
I
interested
don't,
to know what you
but
think.
of course, one of the raptor pioneers was Fran Hammerstrom, and so she was such an excellent role model for everyone. That may have been, and a teacher for so many, that I would guess that that's why everyone was more open to having women in the raptor field.
Yeah, it does seem really important to have mentors and people to look up to that you can really identify with. Jamie, has that been your experience in conservation education?
I haven't personally experienced any like negativity directed towards my gender throughout my career. I mean, I'll be 44 soon, so I feel fortunate for that. I would say my when you first proposed this question to us, Jordan, I think what popped into my mind was something that maybe Julie mentioned earlier was kind of having this work-life balance. I came to Hawk Mountain when I was 40 and I needed a change in my former career. And I broke up with the father of my child. I had a young daughter, and I moved. And especially for nonprofits and working conservation, you're most likely not getting the highest salary. So that was a big leap of faith for me, saying I'm going to follow my heart and do something that's really something that would be a dream job, and do this. And I'm just going to trust that everything's going to work out for me financially and things like that. So I found it, like being successful and having to balance being a mother is my biggest challenge. And when you work for an organization when there's so many programs on the weekends, and you have to be there, you're as a leadership role, and that your daughter's at soccer practice or something like that, but the work you're doing is so important. So for me, I think that's where my thought process goes with that question that you asked, is just finding that balance of you're doing such important work that you're so passionate about, but at the same time, first and foremost, I'm a mom, and just finding that balance.
Do you think that society pressures are different for women than men, where maybe you're expected to do all of these things outside of work and you're succeeding in your career?
Oh, and yes, and Jamie, when my mom comes over, why is your house dirty? Yes, yes, I do. I think so, Jordan. I think that oftentimes, of course, not always, but I think, in our culture, there's a lot of assumptions, that the mother is the primary caregiver and responsible for everything. So it is a lot. Yeah, for sure. I'd like to say I love my daughter very much.
Is she listening in?
Maybe. She's 8 now.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, so I would love to hear from you, Julie, if what your experience has been, if you feel like you faced any challenges that are special to being a woman.
I think so. I think one of the interesting parts about facing challenges is I'm not sure that I noticed I was facing challenges until I had a partner who was like, what the hell? Like, how are people treating you like that? Or, kind of pointing it out to me. And I was like, oh, that is weird that they won't let me run the trapping blind while pregnant, like, why not? Or I am wearing a bracelet. Can I take a bird out of a mist net? These were comments that are like, you can't do that, right, with a bracelet on. And so I think as an individual, you just kind of roll with it. You're like, oh yeah, you're right, probably, maybe. And then, although now that we're starting to talk about it a little bit more, I feel like it's starting to occur to people like, hey, wait a minute, that's not cool, that's not right. And I definitely feel like, though, where I really see it as a mentor, I have male students and I have female students, and they get treated very differently. And it's really something to see. So I've had my female students, I remember I had one in particular, she had done this great work and she was giving a poster at RRF, and she was so excited to talk to somebody, and he came to her poster. And I mean, she had been talking about this before the meeting of how great it was to be to talk to him. And she gave him the whole spiel about the poster. And at the end, he said, I just want to let you know you have gorgeous hair. And he commented on her attractiveness rate. No, I mean, these are, and this is not stories from, this is like in the past 10 years, right? This has happened. And I just
My
see
stories,
women.
I forgot to say, were from the 70s. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it
we've made more
continues on. and I think that I see my female students, my women, they tend to have less networking opportunities than the fellas. They tend to not be taken as seriously. They've been told not to go on to do PhDs if they're planning on getting pregnant. they're kind of questioned a lot more. And so what's happened is, honestly, my lab has somehow, in some ways, has morphed in our conversations, and we spend a lot of time talking about kind of the culture of science, and for both sides, sort of for women to sort of see how other women are dealing with it, and for men to see like, hey, this is going on with your, your lab mates, and they're just as appalled as we are. It's sort of like, how can this be happening with these women who are doing great science? And so, I mean, that's one story, and there's several, unfortunately. And so hopefully we start to kind of change that culture.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone has a story to share, and even I do. A few years ago in grad school, I was told by a male professor that he should not have hired me, and he said a woman for this because I disagreed with something that he was doing. And he specifically said he knew he shouldn't have hired a woman for it. And I was floored and I didn't really know what to say. I wish I had had the right response in the moment, but it sticks with me. We had someone in the chat, Cynthia said that she feels a lot of pressure to prove her knowledge and skills to other scientists and especially men in her field. And she's curious if the panelists have any suggestions on combating that kind of imposter syndrome as a woman. How can you take that on and not feel so much pressure to kind of prove yourself and speak correctly and do things right, and really like make yourself seem really important and smart in front of male colleagues or even mentors?
I jump in because I do notice, like, and I've talked about this with some of our female colleagues. I think that like women are questioned a lot more if they make a decision. Even as little as calling a bird flying by on a hill, right? Oh, are you sure that's what that was, right? And there's a lot of questioning that goes on, and I don't know that there's a lot to combat that sort of thing, except staying cool, trying to be clear about why you're saying what you're saying, and maybe try to get help of your colleagues to if you need that kind of support too, that can kind of work sometimes. So we've had people in our labs where there's conflicts, and then I can help to work those out. um, so that can help, but I think in the end too, a lot of it goes to just, I mean, I am a goofy person, and I've never had the spell articulate scientific way of being, and I've just had to accept myself as that's why I am in science and as a communicator. And at some point, you just kind of got to roll with it. And I think people will see through that. And if people are judging you on that sort of thing, then just move on.
Great, thanks for the advice. I think we all suffer from imposter syndrome a little bit, and I've definitely felt that before. It's really hard to deal with it, but yeah, I kind of like the idea of sort of like moving on and trying your best not to worry what that other person is thinking of you, because ultimately it just takes up energy that you could be spending on something more important. But it is always easier said than done, isn't it? So having supportive people around you is really helpful too.
Jordan, can I add
Um,
something?
oh, please do, Jamie. Yes.
So I'm obsessed with Jane Goodall, love her, and I read so many of her books. And she got a lot of criticism as a woman, doing all this pioneering work in the field back in the day. And I always remember she said advice she was giving. She was saying, "I never people who criticize me, I never even dignify them with a response because they're not worth it." So I always keep that in mind. But also, I would say something for me personally, just in general, is just really if I'm going to be like confronting some sort of like issue that's bothering me, is really trying to separate my emotions from it, and give I try to do that, not always successful, but
Yeah, same with me. Um, so to kind of piggyback off of this question, I wanted to ask if any of you had ideas for maybe addressing sort of the lack of diversity in conservation biology and education, or if you have initiatives that you've worked on that you'd like to share or other ideas. I think we would all love to hear that, because there's a lot of people here who may be able to implement some things where they work as well.
I'm happy to chime in. It's something we've been talking about a lot recently over the past year and a half, 2 years at Hawk Mountain, which I'm sure is happening across the nation in many organizations. We always are talking about IDEA, which inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility. That's how, and you were like IDEA. So something we're always talking about at our team meetings and stuff is how we can what can we do to remove barriers for diverse audiences, whether they're going to be participating in programs or, diverse people to more diversify the field of conservation. And so we have been really fortunate that we have found a lot of generous donors that are really supportive of these IDEA principles. So we have an IDEA fund, and there, that we can use to remove barriers. And so one thing that we have at Hawk Mountain that we hope has a really great positive impact on raptor conservation is a traineeship program, domestic and international. And folks can come for 3-4 months, and they have a free place to stay, they get stipends. And so that's something that we really try to invite diverse applicants and make sure that their diverse applicants are aware of these opportunities that are out there. And so that's something that has been successful at Hawk Mountain as well, like specifically reaching out to organizations or individuals, and as well as offering programs that would make diverse audiences feel welcome to come to Hawk Mountain. So, we've always had IDEA principles in play, but now we're really making a focus to see how can we improve this and make all types of people with different backgrounds and different abilities, different ethnic groups feel welcome at Hawk Mountain and engaged in raptor conservation. And then taking it a step further for those who are really want to take a deep dive and are perhaps just starting their career or just coming out of school to do the traineeship program. And that's when you really get some serious experience.
There is a comment in the chat from Ana Morales, and she says that getting into the field in a sexist country like Colombia, you have to constantly prove yourself to be good and tough and resist, she says, whatever the field throws at you. And I had sort of had a little sub-bullet point for this question. I was going to ask you, Jamie, you've done so much around the world. I'm curious to know, how can we best support women in conservation in other countries? And have you seen a lot of variation and challenges facing those women? And it sounds like there probably is.
Sure, yeah. And one thing I will say, going back to the traineeship program, international, the majority of them have been females. I think it's like 80%, 70 to 80% for Hawk Mountain. So that's something we view as very positive. Yeah, I think finances is always a huge thing, and I've seen a lot of poverty around the world. And one thing I noticed right away when I first started, traveling abroad in college and Central American stuff is like, wow, like, how I live in the United States is not how the rest of the world lives. And that was really a really impactful experience, that my worldview was just changed and became much bigger. So kind of just recognizing that. So, like I was saying earlier, removing barriers, whether they're geographical or financial, and like, is there funding available to help that? And to whoever made that comment in Colombia, we have contacts in Colombia who recently started a Hawk Watch site, and she's female, Esther Vallejo, and I know she is looking for people to join her on her efforts. And I think that, the pandemic kind of forced everyone to jump into the virtual world head first, with lots of Zooming and WebEx. And I think that's really opened up a lot of opportunities to continue, because it's a small world. Conservation is a small world, but then raptor conservation, that's a very narrow niche. And it's like, it's all about networking and forming these relationships. And, that's one thing that's so great with the traineeship program at Hawk Mountain. There is no cost to it. Like, you apply and you've got the heart and the passion, regardless of what country you're from. If you have zero in your bank account, that's okay. And that's because, and that was from some very generous, the Acopian family was just had the foresight to set up this fund to fund it, hopefully, indefinitely. So I don't know. Did I answer? I was rambling. Sorry.
That was a great answer. I had no idea that you had the traineeship program. That's really, really cool. I hope that, yeah, maybe some people even from this discussion today will apply for that. Um, Julie or Karen, do you have any comments on how you think we could address the lack of diversity in the field, maybe in academia or in governmental agencies?
Go ahead, Julie. I've been retired too long, I think, to address that.
Yeah, I think we've been doing in our department a lot of implicit bias training. I think that's helped a lot in trying to understand how our recruitment strategies and hiring strategies, could be improved. For us, we've tried to get away from unpaid positions, which I think could be a barrier for some people. We've also tried to identify things in application processes that can be inherently biased, right? Like removing the GREs as one of the indicators for students, or looking at faculties, and if they have a gap in their publication record, does it really matter? Like it could be okay, right? Because that's inherently biased, maybe against caregivers and lots of things like that. So we've been moving that way for trying to recruit, and then for retention. I think just trying to support culture shifts in as many ways as possible by removing institutional barriers or challenges. And yeah, I also think, this process of changing our culture is going to need to come from a very kind of inclusive survey of everyone in it. I think that's where the best ideas will come from, sort of. I mean, I'm a bit of an old timer at this point. I think probably some of the best ideas for improving diversity and inclusion is going to be coming from the community broadly, and including women of color, which of course is something we haven't talked about explicitly, but that's going to be very important for us.
Yeah, I was just looking at the chat, and Laura Chavez was commenting on sort of familial pressures as well. She's from Venezuela, and she says her family expects her to have like a stable job, but they don't understand that you can have a really strong career in wildlife and conservation, but they find it confusing. So there's like cultural pressures that are all tied in as well. So it's not just systemic implicit bias within the institutions that are hiring women, it's cultural as well. So there's a lot that we're fighting against. And so to pivot off of that, I would love to hear from each of you what pieces of practical advice you might have for women who are looking to enter conservation or continue their careers in conservation and maybe even in raptor biology, and how they can sort of give themselves that boost that they need to land these jobs that they're looking at.
Again, I've been out of it so long. I see so many people, so many, women and men coming in and taking temporary jobs and getting a huge amount of experience. But they can't just keep stringing temporary jobs forever and ever and ever. So I'm going to leave it to the younger people to figure out how to get involved. And I started my career, like I said, in the 70s. And that was kind of the decade of the environment. And so there were lots of openings then. And I'm not sure that's as much the case now, but I know there are opportunities. Jamie?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm thinking about all your words. Yeah. So what I tell people, well, oftentimes it's when I'm working with a live raptor on the ground, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, how can I do what you do? I want to do this." And just in general, not even just raptors, but just other animals had the opportunity to work with, the privilege to work with in the past. The best advice I can give to anyone that wants to do work with live animals, or do conservation work with animals, is to volunteer, do internships, traineeships, because no one will hire you without experience working with these animals. And how do you get the experience? You volunteer. So I can tell you, when I was in my young 20s, and even any opportunity I had when I had free time, I was volunteering at wildlife rehabilitation centers. I was volunteering at zoos. I was volunteering at animal shelters. And I would always go online and look at places like goabroad.com, jobsabroad.com. And I'd go to Venezuela for 3 months, and really at minimal cost to myself, just the flight, because I'd be staying at this wildlife sanctuary and being the primary caregiver and doing education programs in Spanish. And having those things, I learned so much from those experiences. I mean, it makes me who I am, but not only that, it got me the job because I I already had experience working with raptors. I already had experience working with primates because I volunteered. And also internships, or for Hawk Mountain, a traineeship, you know. So I think that's and I think that's really good advice. And also, when you do those types of experiences, volunteering and interning, you're building your networking system. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a very small world with conservation, and particularly with avian conservation or raptors. So you're building your letters of recommendation. And that's very powerful too. And you're building, it's all about who you know, your personal relationships, and that hands-on experience working with what that species you're into or that group of animals that you're into.
Yeah,
Pass.
I
Okay.
totally I totally agree with you, Jamie. I think a lot of it is building your resume, and hopefully um, more and more organizations are offering paid positions, and I would like to see that, not just volunteer-based positions, because of course that only reaches a certain level of privileged person, and I definitely experienced that privilege, that I always had my parents there to back me up. But there are jobs out there that are looking for people that will pay. For example, Hawk Watch, we hire a huge crew of hawk counters every single fall, and we do pay a daily stipend. And so I think that's kind of a great way to get your foot in the door and get a lot of experience. And then hopefully, as you're moving forward, you'll be able to find more paid positions. And I noticed that you said that before, Dr. Heath, and I think that's incredibly important, to be able to pay our volunteers and be able to pay our interns. Um, did you have anything to add, Dr. Heath?
Um, I don't know. People ask me this question a lot, especially like how to get into graduate school and things like that.
Yeah.
And I saw a speech on a completely different field recently where someone said they don't like to give advice because it implies that there's one certain way or right way and to do it and it'll work. And I think that's really true of our field too. Like there's no one way to do it. There's no right way. It's just, I actually feel like a lot of it is persistence and luck. And when things aren't working out and you're maybe not getting positions or not getting started, the biggest difference about kind of staying is just ends up being persistence, I think. And then at some point things align and you'll go forward. And I actually feel like that has never changed for me in this field. Like from getting into graduate school to being a tenure professor trying to get, grants, it's all about persistence and luck. And at some point you hit the right point and you get funding, you get into grad school, you get a job. And I don't know if people take that as bad news. To me, it's like statistically, I never should have been here, right? Like I did everything wrong that I could do. I took breaks, I had kids, I switched my focus all the time, what I was going to do. I shouldn't have made it to this point, but I did, just because I actually didn't know better. I just kind of kept going. And so that's kind of what I have to about that topic.
Yeah, I probably at a time I would apply for like 10 to 15, technician positions, and I wouldn't hear back from five, and I would only get an interview from three, and then eventually I would get a job. So yes, learning how to deal with no's or being ghosted is, I think, super important, and just being persistent. Um, Great. I wanted to switch gears a little bit because we have a really fun question in the chat from Julie Drake, who is a retired K-12 educator, and she's volunteering with a group doing raptor counts in Los Angeles. She says that each volunteer is assigned a nest and they log their observations. And she wants to know, would the panelists please share one amazing thing you have witnessed when working with raptors?
You put that on the list. And that was the hardest question of all.
I have a couple of good stories actually from trapping in the Florida Keys. So we had a hawk blind and we were trapping in the Florida Keys. And of course, we get a lot of peregrine falcons and merlins and things like that. And one time, when we were trapping, we had a tree off in the distance, and often merlins would perch there, and they would come into the station to trap to go for the dove behind a net. And when they came in, their legs would hang down and swing like this, and I loved that, right? Because it was just this bullet with these hanging legs swinging down, and they just always right in. So I think merlins coming in. Amazing. And then the sound of a peregrine coming in also just such sensory, Those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, I heard, I think it was a Cooper's hawk stoop, and it was the first time I had heard a bird of prey stoop overhead when I was visiting one of our sites, and it was so loud. It was like a tiny little jet coming in. And that really surprised me. I didn't realize how loud that would be, but it's so cool.
Mhm.
Jamie, did you think of anything? I think people would love to hear about experiences, what it's like to have an education bird on the hand.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, I have to say. I was kind of chuckling to myself when you were like, "What like an amazing experience!" I was working with our red-tailed hawk, and she coughed up a pellet, and I caught it in my other hand. I was like, "Yes!" I was like, "It's not just the owls that have the pellets," but so that was fun. But that is really amazing. Actually, just recently we did a wild love program over Valentine's Day, a new program, and for about a year now, it's kind of one of our newer educator birds, a barn owl, and so we see this owl all the time, and then but to witness the reactions of the audience when my coworker, because I was just in the audience, Aaron brought out the barn owl, and everyone just gasped. They were like, wow, it was such a beautiful bird, and that I was like, wow, I've kind of taken little barn owl for granted because I see him all the time. I forgot what a stunning impression he makes when people see one up close for the first time. That was really rewarding. Um,
That's great. I think that was some of your basketball skills coming in to catch the pellet when it was
sure.
So, we are moving into the last 5 minutes of the discussion today. So, Sammy did put in the chat that please, if you have more questions, this is the time to ask them. And I did get a question from Allie. Hi, Allie. It's good to see you. Allie is finishing up her master's, and she loves where she currently lives. And she's in that position where a lot of us get to, where you're deciding what's next, but you're trying to balance like where you want to live versus your career. And she wants to know, can it be done? Is it possible to find that balance? And what advice can you give regarding picking a location where you love to live while finding the position that you love as well?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I would say, like your job, assuming if you're working at least 40 hours a week, that's such a huge chunk of your life. You're sometimes spending more time with your coworkers than you are your family, right? So you want to make sure it's something you really enjoy.
For us, I had before we lived here, we lived on Long Island in New York, which actually was a phenomenal place to live for a period of time. But when we started having kids, we wanted to move somewhere else. So where we lived was really important. And luckily, I got a position in Boise, Idaho, which is a great place for our family and where we wanted to end up in the West. So I think it's important to acknowledge. It's important to know yourself and whether or not to weight your sort of personal interests versus your job. And once you have those, don't be afraid. You don't have to give up everything in your life to be a wildlife biologist or to be a raptor biologist, right? Acknowledge and weight the things that are important. If having a family or where you live is really important too for the type of lifestyle or being near your family and friends, then stay true to that.
And even going back to what you said before, it seems like there's also a little bit of luck that happens as well. And if you can bide your time, then maybe eventually just the right position will come up and you'll move into it. And I feel like that's what happened for me working for Hawkwatch. I couldn't believe that a position opened up where I wanted to live. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but yeah, I think being open to moving as well. There's probably a lot of really wonderful places to live. I hadn't really considered Salt Lake City, honestly, before I moved out here, and I was really pleasantly surprised. So I think we maybe are a little bit more flexible than we give ourselves credit for. So there's a couple other questions in the chat, and this one I would love to hear from Karen especially. We have a question from Jadzia Rodriguez, and she's wondering, how has collaboration in Raptor research changed over time, or how has the workforce changed? And I even had that in the list of questions that I wanted to ask is, how has Raptor biology and conservation changed over the past few decades? What have you noticed, and what would you share with us?
Oh gosh. Ever since I started, there's always I've always been part of a team. So there's always been collaboration, at least within agencies. And probably now more than ever, there's a need to collaborate among agencies and universities because of some of the funding shortages that everybody needs to pool their resources to get things done, probably more than in the past. But I think it's always the idea of being a lone wildlife biologist out in the wilderness doing everything on your own, that doesn't happen. So, so yeah, collaboration has always been important, and it probably will be increasingly important.
Yes, I think that is a great call of action to end on. And I do see that even with Hawkwatch, we're collaborating with a lot of different agencies, and we have students in Dr. Heath's lab who are also working for Hawkwatch. I just see, especially in raptor biology, that there is a really strong desire to partner and work with each other. And I think altogether, hopefully we can have a success in raptor conservation in the future. So since we're just about out of time, I think we can wrap up the discussion here. And I want to thank our panelists so much for being here this afternoon to celebrate women in raptor conservation. And I also want to thank all of our attendees for being here and for your support, interest in women in raptor conservation. And I can truly say that the future of conservation is female. So thank you all, and have a wonderful evening. Stammy and I, we can maybe stick around for a few minutes to answer some of the questions in the chat about hawk migration sites. But other than that, panelists, thank you again so much for being here. It was really a pleasure to have your expertise and your commentary.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing.
Thanks so much. It was
Great.
so fun.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.